Hello and welcome to ArtShow. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me John J. O'Connor. Hey, John, how are you today?
Doing pretty well. Thanks, Craig. Glad to talk to you today.
So happy to have you on the show. Fan of your work.
Oh,
And
thanks.
so I went online, chose a bunch of images, and so the first thing I'm showing this. This is, I'm sure, a very popular image of yours. But what I really enjoyed was actually the scale of it, right?
Mhm.
Because when I first saw these, I thought they were much smaller, but it turns out that these are really just they're a wonderful size. Is that like a standard size that you work on?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a sort of, I mean, at least my practice is kind of turned into a sort of, I guess, a range between large scale drawings, which this one is a good example of, and then also sort of small scale, either drawings or collages or other things. So I kind of like working back and forth between really large, sort of very like labor intensive, time consuming pieces that can kind of evolve slowly, and then sort of faster things that, that happen quicker, and I can kind of finish and sort of see ideas resolved a little bit more immediately.
So this was fascinating. Well, a lot of your pieces are fascinating because you give right on your
Thanks.
website sort of explanations about the creation process of this. So is this the one that was this chaos? No. Which one? Which one? I can't remember which one.
This is about predictions of the future. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love the explanation behind it, and it seems to me like what you do is you set up these rules for yourself ahead of time and then follow those rules to see what sort of happens. Is that would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, totally. And generally I have a kind of rule that gets like so a large piece like this, I'll have a sort of rule, an idea that gets it sort of started, generates the drawing. And so in this case, the upper sort of portion of the drawing, which has the kind of, everything kind of emanating from that one point.
Right.
Initially I had that just drawn, and that was a system of translating these various predictions of the future, the language of them
Oh, this
into
was Nostradamus? Is that what this is?
Nostradamus for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you based it on the length of the size of the words, determined the
Yeah,
length of the. So
yeah, I
here's
think
my $1 million question to you, because I
sure.
totally understand why you would do this. But my question is, when you create rules like that, because you have several different ones, several different rules that you've set up within these pictures, do you find that you have to follow that rule to its natural conclusion, or do you ever get halfway and decide to break the rule?
Yeah, it varies. Like usually, yeah, usually there's enough room that I can kind of play around. Like it starts off a little bit loosely. I get kind of restless, so I'll often change the rule as I go,
Okay.
particularly like if it's not looking interesting, or if it feels like, because I'll set the rule up and it kind of maybe it sounds good, or it gets at the idea for me. But then when you see it on paper or on another surface, if it doesn't look interesting, then I'll be like, okay, I need to kind of adjust. So yeah, and the drawings like these can vary pretty wildly over. I mean, this may take, I don't know how long this took, maybe a year and a half or so,
For that
so
larger piece. Okay.
yeah, this one as well is pretty large.
So it's
Probably
pretty
the
large,
same.
but a different set of rules. So you set up different rules for each piece. Now, I can't help but ask about these, these creation rules because I find them so fascinating. And because they're so varied, when you're really starting a project. So I guess my question is what really starts all of this for you when you're going to make something new?
Yeah, you mean what kind of gets me going on a piece, maybe in
Yeah,
particular?
I guess so. Because
Yeah,
to me it seems like there are so many components that you have that you're sort of juggling in these.
yeah.
How do you start it?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funnier on this one because it's fairly straightforward. This I start at the top left and work my way down to the bottom right. Uh,
Oh,
so,
okay. Well, we could
so
just
yeah,
end the conversation. I get it.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of it's like, but that kind of like getting started. Like sometimes I do tend to like maybe the place of I'll have to sort of decide where to start on the paper. But in this case, this is a series of drawings that are Like one, they're basically a continuation, like a story. They're sort of thinking of like chapters in a book, maybe, or pages in a book. And so each where one drawing ends, the next large piece will begin with this sort of picking up on the story. And if you see in the top left is the letter E. So I'm doing one for each letter of the alphabet. So I'm just on E right now, though, and I don't think I'm going to make it actually to Z. But we'll
I'm
see
there
if you
for
want.
you. I'm your supporter. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll probably be long gone before I hit Z. But so the idea then is like, so the next one would be F, and I would start with F on the top left and work my way down. And the story has a sort of set of rules that, kind of is wrapped up in it. But otherwise, other drawings, like the previous one you showed, it's maybe an idea that I'm interested in, or in this case, it's based on conspiracy theories. So I was interested in the language of conspiracy theories and how does that kind of translate into physical action. So if you hear something, you begin to believe it, you begin to act on it. And so in this case, it was sort of, I structured the initial, like when I started the drawing, I started with a large overall grid and I started collecting, and I thought, well, I'll translate the language of these conspiracy theories into like images or icons or forms or abstract shapes, And so as I sort of collected the data, the drawing began to kind of take shape that way. I don't know if that makes sense or if it's too
No,
removed from that.
that makes perfect sense. So I'm actually a little curious about. It almost seems like the origin for a lot of your works is language itself.
Yeah, recently too, in particular. Although the Nostradamus one is a little bit older, and I realize I'm still dealing with it then, even though I thought, I was like,
well, some of these works you just said that they can take up to like a year or so.
Yeah, this drawing I worked on for a couple of years. This was very slow. A lot of it is language, and it's language and data, sort of information that becomes kind of distilled into a form that you could analyze and sort of break down and sort of see patterns in. And then I'm really interested in kind of like ways in which an experience gets kind of, you could describe it through language or it could be quantified through data. And how do I take that language or take that data and sort of like reincarnate it into a form to almost like reimagine what this thing looked like or could have felt like, or, examining it in a visual way when you wouldn't actually even know what an experience looks like in particular. So language tends to be a pretty common, I'm really fascinated by it. And so it's pretty central right now.
I mean, I would guess that would be the springboard that would start new works is the
totally. Yeah.
Examining and trying to pull apart language really and figure out how the pieces are made and what you can actually do with it. I'm also now kind of curious that if these take a long time, because it does look very sort of labor intensive, it's not, these aren't computer made, this is all hand done, right?
Yeah.
For the large part. Do you find yourself working then on multiple pieces at the same time?
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
How do you know which one to be working on, or is it just like a whim?
Yeah. This probably goes back to your question about do the rules change. I'll work on something for a while and then kind of, I have like in my studio, wherever I've been, I don't know how you work. Love your work too, actually. I'm not talking, but yeah. But I tend to fill my entire space with things and then get started on a bunch of stuff, which maybe is why they also take a long time. But I like the kind of like, the sort of intermingling of ideas. You may have that conspiracy idea, then I have something that's more of a pattern based or just an abstraction in some way. So how do they communicate or like affect each other? So I work on a lot of things simultaneously. In terms of the labor, this is like of that same series. This is the letter C. So I've done, this one I did maybe 8 years ago. I don't even know now. Which was interesting in this one. Originally I had drawn all the text in this sort of iconography. And then I decided to put in this background. So the ground actually is all graphite and then colored pencil. So the black. So that took probably just as long as the rest of it. It seemed like just to kind of fill in around it. But I wanted it to feel like shifting from like a daytime to nighttime or something, But the labor in that is really also I love. It's slow. It's like meditative,
it was when I was thinking about your work. Actually, the last artist I interviewed, John Mantow, he and I had a wonderful discussion. We were talking about David Salle, and I started to think about him looking at your work because although there's nothing sort of identical about it. The idea for me, Salle was you could take, two images and then suddenly you have a third storyline that you can talk about. And those images sometimes can be related or sometimes can be completely opposite. And then the more images that you add on that, the crazier and bigger the story can get. So when looking at your work, I'm sort of thinking about the same thing about, you're not just using words, you're using, little icons and graphics and adding those together, your storyline is immense now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thinking about it. Does it ever feel like it gets out of control for you, or are you?
Yeah, that's it. I love that. I love that. Wrapping up with that question. Have you ever lost control? First, I've never really thought of it related to Sally, but I think that's fascinating. That's a really interesting way to think of it. But I do love the idea that you just described of kind of elements that increase in complexity over time, so that you begin to kind of, if you, like you said, you put two things together, they create something, they create a third thing, but then you create that, when you juxtapose that third thing with a fourth, then it becomes exponentially complex. So I think I love the getting lost in all that, actually I really, so maybe it does feel like it gets chaotic, like those drawings are going to be, the story becomes so convoluted that you couldn't, I think, even discern where the person's intentions were in moving through life, is my thought. I'll make A through Z and it would be the lifespan of an individual from like a moment to the concluding moment, but how that transpires is through exactly what you described. One thing connecting to another, So I'll be thinking about the David Sally connection after that. So.
Well, I'm curious. I love the fact that on your website you have they're like little one paragraphs that really sort of help encapsulate the images. But I'm also thinking about, like, can the artwork live beyond just having that? Does that always need to be attached to it? Do you ever write anything on the back of your artworks? Any kind of?
It's interesting. Not really. Yeah, often. I mean, on the large pieces, I don't on the back, only because they're really hard to flip around. They're to move. The small drawings I often do. I do often write things in so it's difficult to see on the screen, but I actually take all of my notes. Anything I'm thinking of, I write directly on the paper, but it gets kind of like embedded into this, like in this case, the structure or the color,
Yeah.
So there is the idea or the note taking or the figuring out the sort of calculations or just an idea that pops in my head or something cool that I would hear. Like maybe I'll write something about David Sally, sort of in one of the drawings, and it'll just get embedded into the piece.
Yeah.
Those descriptions are interesting because they started actually in part because, like you described, getting kind of lost or at the chaos. Like I would jot down separately, just sort of sequence. I did this and then I did this and I did this to sort of like be able to think about it differently, and then the gallery kind of started to ask if I could do that and show them to people. Because I remember one experience, and this real quick, I was first time I ever showed a large drawing, somebody asked me to describe it or like, what's going on with this drawing? And I started trying to talk about it. And I remember the guy said, in the middle of it, he's like, wait a minute, you made this, didn't you? I was like, oh yeah, I did make it. He said, because you're talking about it like someone else made it,
Yeah,
I'm trying to,
I love that.
I thought it was interesting too. Like,
yeah,
I looked maybe like a fool, like I didn't know what I was talking about. But I got so lost in it that I was like trying to discern what had happened. And so the description partly came out of that too,
I mean, as an artist, I can understand that. To me, that's a desire to be able to sit outside of your own work to do it. But people want to hear about, like, oh, it's about my dead cat, or something really connected that they can sort of pick up real easy. I would love to, I think your work is wonderful because it really makes me sit and look at it for a long time, which a lot of artwork is just so flashy now and right now. But even I, staring at some pieces, even if after I've read it, I want more. Like I want an appendix or a codex or something that
interesting.
sort of helps tie that stuff together. So work on that, and then
I'll get back to you with it. Yeah, my appendix. That'll be good.
So I want to know about your early start as an artist, and in particular, one of the questions I love to ask is, do you have a memory of a first exposure to art that just always sticks in your head or it blew you away? Or do you have anything like that?
Yeah. I don't think there's one, I don't know if I have one particular, well, it's interesting when you think about what would be an experience to art, I didn't have, you know, where I grew up, we didn't have like actual artwork around the house for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
It was more reproductions of things and kind of, so I didn't really see a lot of real like artwork that would be painted and kind of you would, you know, sort
Mm-hmm.
of unique objects themselves. One thing I do recall though is and I actually just found it again the other day is my grandmother. This is maybe this no, this is like the dead cat you're talking about.
No, this is
Um,
revealing. I can tell. I can't wait.
yeah,
Go ahead.
my grandmother painted this clown when she took a class. This sounds hilarious. Clowns are funny but also scary.
Uh-huh.
Um, and she had it hanging up in her house. And I think it was because she made it, and also because I could really see like the surface. And I asked her a lot about how she painted it.
Mm.
That I became really interested in that as like a unique object that she made that I kept coming back to. What I loved about it was just visiting the piece again and again, and that image would sort of stay the same.
Mm.
Obviously, I and the conditions around it are changing, but it felt like in that sense it was reciprocal. You know, like it would give more to me. You know, I would come to it, and then it would kind of
Mm.
feel like it would change. And so I really became kind of. I mean, there was a certain number of things at like grandparents' houses that did that for me because it was like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see it every day. So when
Mm-hmm.
I would, they would become more sort of significant. You know, I don't know if
Just,
that
no,
that
that's
answers.
perfect. I'm kind of curious. Was the clown? Do you remember? Was the color really saturated?
You know what? It's really funny. It is. It had a really bright blue background, and it had like, yeah. And it's funny that you bring that up too, because my mom, her house, while she wasn't an artist, she collected tons and tons of stuff. Like, and she created these little vignettes of all different varieties of like, you know, figures and textures. And I think that her sort of aesthetic of like a really kind of overload, you know, and the
Mm-hmm.
sensory. I don't think she did it like thinking I'm going to create this. She just was interested in creating these
Right.
little scenes. I mean, everything we had when we were growing up, like, was covered. Our couches were covered with little things, like,
Mm-hmm.
so nothing was functional. It was all like her own aesthetic, which really affected me as well. You know?
I'm thinking of your work with all these little vignettes put together. So
Yeah,
it's
totally.
it's
Yeah,
always a valuable question to ask because sometimes artists are surprised by like, oh yeah, there is a connection to that. So I'm always happy about that. So
yeah.
you've been making artwork for quite a while. Do you feel like your artwork has changed over the years?
You
How?
calling me old? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Yeah.
that's okay. I got gray hair too. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I should have shaved today. I knew it.
Right?
I was giving away my age. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, it's since, you mean since I
Since
sort of
ever.
started. Oh
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah, since ever. Totally.
so how has it changed? One of the questions I'd like to find out is, have you always seen it as a gradual change, or have there been times when it's been like drastic changes?
For me, it seems kind of gradual. And I think there are moments that, like when I say I've done residencies or done things where I've kind of been really, really immersed in it, that I feel like it's more of a radical change, but still within the same sort of trajectory. I think like I was really interested in abstraction early on. Also very interested in like when I was younger, I would make sort of abstract paintings and sort of really textural found objects, and then I also made very detailed, almost like MC Escher types of drawings, and so those kind of fused. Also, I think the language used to be more in the periphery. It was like just a note-taking thing, and now it's become, like you had said, more central. But also, I mean, I do make drawings, but I also in the sort of around the time COVID or so, a little bit before, I started working with like a group of collaborators. We do some multimedia stuff. I'm working with a writer now. So I feel like there's like I've been able to try a lot of different things while maintaining a kind of drawing practice, which is the most rewarding and exciting for me, you know.
Hmm.
I don't know if that gets at what you were asking, but
No, it does. It does.
yeah.
Um,
As you can
one
tell,
of
I
the
can
things I
talk about. So
one of the things I wanted to revisit, we were talking early on about your audience and the people who come. So you obviously have interaction. People are asking you to explain it or whatnot. When you're making your work, do you have any specific hopes that you want your audiences to be walking away with, or do you even think about the audience at all when you're creating the work?
I mean, it comes into your mind, I guess, my mind, not yours, but it comes into your mind. Like,
That'd be creepy.
um, I implanted a thought in your mind. Um, yeah, I don't really think about it that often. It sort of maybe feels like I should, but I kind of like really get absorbed in it myself. And I hope that the ideas get communicated. Maybe that's part of the reason why in retrospect or retroactively, I will write sort of descriptions to give someone some insight, into it. Because I do like that some of the ideas are known. I don't want those descriptions to like explain something like and be like, oh, I get it. I can move on. But I also really love work that is, asks you to sort of like look at it aesthetically and maybe like really, really look at it as maybe pattern or abstraction or color or form, but also you can kind of decode and sort of look at it and take information away. So I love the kind of play between those two things. And I hope my work kind of does that,
Yeah. I mean, you can
You
never
can
be
glean
100%
something,
sure. Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to tell. People say either good things or bad things. I don't know what to believe. So.
I'm always surprised when I ask that question because I have some artists that are like, no, I never think about them at all. And other people are like, it's paramount to everything I do. But it's
I
like,
know.
I can't always judge what the artist is going to say by that based on their work because I just never know. It seems like it's an individual kind of a thing.
Did you
So
think I would
speaking of,
say I do or not? Or what did you have a guess or no from me?
I would have guessed no, that you didn't really give a
Oh,
crap
okay.
about what they thought.
You
Like,
guess I'm very
you're on
selfish.
your own. You're like,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because your work is intense, right? There's a lot to contemplate on that. And I can't imagine, the more I find audiences, the more you give audiences in terms of information within your work, the harder it is to give them a specific storyline. They always bring their own sort of baggage to it. I mean, I personally don't care what baggage people bring, so I'm excited when they see different things. But that's
Yeah.
I'm an odd bird. So, but
Yeah.
speaking of what people see within the work and what you're putting in the work, my next question is really about how do you see the work? And in particular, do you see your work as being autobiographical in nature or not at all?
That's a good question, actually, because often people see it as autobiographical.
Yeah, but
And
some of the stories that you tell, like that Nostradamus, I mean, I don't, aside from the actual image, I don't know what the connection would be.
yeah. I mean, the narrative ones possibly people will like sort of think they're about me, or I've done self portraits, of course. So there's that. I think that like I sort of think of it as a little bit of both. I guess the autobiography, like it's like my entry point often into an idea. So like in those narrative drawings that you showed a couple of, I'll take I think a personal experience will maybe kick it off, but then it'll be like you described, where then it's directed in a way that obviously my life hasn't gone. So it feels like it is a starting point that allows me to kind of engage with the subject matter. But then that part of me, I feel I don't even think about after that certain point. It's not the case with all of them, but that's usually the case with the ones that feel more autobiographical. Yeah.
So this, I don't know if you can answer this question. Would you consider your works to be proactive or reactive?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I don't know. Proactive or reactive? If I just pick one of them, I know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm easily lied to, so that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know. That's good. I should lie to you. Okay, I say
Yeah,
proactive or reactive. I guess in relation to what are you thinking? Just in general, as
in general. So like the idea that you have something and then you set up a bunch of rules for yourself to translate that into it.
Yeah.
So to me, that would be proactive. That
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
you're working ahead of what it is that you've come across, rather
Mhm.
than somebody hit you with your car and now you paint car paintings. That would be a
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
another thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because the way you just described that, I thought you were going to say that's reactive because you're reacting to something that has already existed in the world.
Yeah, well,
So
I'm
maybe I
still
don't
working
know.
on that question. So I'm not.
It's a great question, actually. I have never thought about it in that way. And I think I need to think about it some more.
All right.
But yeah,
That's
it's a
fair
good one.
enough. Fair enough.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
I want to know a little bit about the mediums that you work with. So a lot of your work seems to be on paper.
Hmm.
Is that a favorite medium of yours, or is it space issues, or is it
Oh
size,
yeah.
or yeah?
No, I love paper. I love working on paper more than anything. I turned to it in grad school. I mean, I've always drawn and
Uh-huh.
really loved it. But I was painting a lot on canvas in grad school and then also painting then on paper. What I liked about it was I could either just flip it over, or I could recycle it, I could cut it out into a shape, like some of those you showed are sort of shaped drawings. But I also really like that the paper surface, like I have a sort of relationship to it, really connected to it. It feels closer to writing, diagramming, or thinking. And I hope the drawings, like kind of to your question earlier about, how do you integrate, like, are there notes or like an appendix in the drawing? So things that happen and that I can kind of, as I'm figuring out the piece, it feels like a large diagram, or a large scrap piece of paper. And then eventually it kind of crystallizes into this like shape or form. And I like that the two states can exist at once. It's sort of like the initial origin of an idea, and then it's sort of like resolution. So paper is like, but it's interesting because, often they're not paintings, and so there's a kind of people have a different sort of response to paper,
Right.
which is. But.
So, boy, this conversation is going by quick. Time for just two more questions.
Oh, yeah.
One, a very technical, geeky question. So we talked about paper. Do you have a favorite type of paper that you work with?
Yeah, I use this. What do I have it here? A Lennox. I mean, one of them it's from a drawing and framing, and then I use also a Stonehenge. Legion makes this Stonehenge paper.
These are
So
all
I have-
hot presses.
Yeah. Usually hot press. Yeah, and I have a very large roll, like two really really large rolls that I just bought from Talus. But
So
a large roll lasts 10 years.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, I still have some that I'm like, I'm never going to use this, and ta-da.
Yeah, exactly.
So the deckled edge you don't give a crap about that. It's just the surface itself.
More the surface I like. Yeah, the large rolls don't have a deckled edge. Those are it's just a straight cut, So, but they're like I love they're sturdy enough that they can handle a lot of like work, but they aren't textured too heavy that I feel like I can't manipulate them easily. So
what's the usual pound weight on it? Are you working on something thicker, like a 200 or a 300?
I usually work on, so the one I have, like the one that I have on the wall is, I forgot now, the 100. It's it's a 200. So that's
200. Okay, yeah. Sorry, this is totally geeky.
No, I love it.
But
Yeah,
I just forgot. To know. Nobody else will ever ask you that.
Oh, I like it actually. Yeah, it's cool.
So I've got time for just one more question. Question I ask all artists: what does art do for you?
Oh, wow, that's a good one too. That's a close second to the proactive reactive. Yeah, I guess that's a great one. It's funny, you sometimes don't think about these big questions often. I like that you saved it to the end. I mean, it gives me an opportunity to sort of synthesize all things that I'm interested in, so an idea that I sort of observe that, you want to explore, but I'm not doing it through science, or I'm not, doing it through linguistics, but it is a kind of way for me to bring together all these disparate things that I'm interested in, psychology, mathematics, and it becomes something that, it becomes a piece of art. So it doesn't have a real function other than it is a way to kind of explore an idea or a topic. And then I think it's also just exciting to visualize things that you can't see, or almost feels like a forensic kind of investigation where you want to, I try to like give form to something that happened sort of in the past that I can't quite grasp, so there's that, which I think you could read any number of ways, emotionally or spiritually or whatever. So
I think you pegged it.
Yeah.
I think you pegged it in the beginning when you said it allows me to synthesize all things I'm interested in. End quote.
Just cut the second part off.
Right. Yeah, I'll edit that part out.
Yeah, you cut off. Yeah.
Well, John, I can't thank you enough for coming by to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. Some great insights on your work. Now I got to go back and look, and I hope everybody who's watching this does too. We love having you watch today's episode. Of course, liking, sharing, and subscribing really helps push our art show forward. So if you like this program, show us your support. We really like it. And if you have any questions for us, put them in the comments section. If we can't answer them, we can just pass them along to John. So again, John, thank you so much for coming by today. I really appreciate it.
Greg, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it too.
Take care, everyone.